I call Nikki Wagner.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I am very pleased to support this Misuse of Drugs Amendment Bill at its third reading. It covers some serious issues that we need to address to increase the effectiveness of the control of drugs in New Zealand. In particular, to manage the ingredients for the manufacture of methamphetamine P and to ban unregulated psychoactive substances such as chronic. To starve local P labs of the ingredients for manufacture, this bill reclassifies ephedrine and pseudoephedrine as a Class B controlled drug, so that cold and flu medicines which contain these substances will no longer be available over the counter, although, if needed by patients, can be acquired by prescription. And I was interested to hear Chris Farfoy talking about the inconvenience of this. We went by Sir Peter Gluckman's recommendation that there were plenty of alternate medicines that can fill this gap, and feel that the public are prepared to take this little bit of inconvenience for the good of the whole. I also would like to commend the Minister Peter Dunn for his SOP 258, which is an effective stopgap measure to control psychoactive substances such as chronic, a synthetic cannabis product. The government is not prepared to allow these potentially lethal products to be freely available to young people, so have moved swiftly to ban these substances. This can happen as early as the end of next week, while more permanent legislation will follow next year. I believe that this bill will have a significant impact on drug use in New Zealand, and I commend it to the House.
The Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Speaker, very much. It's great to speak on this. My colleague, Honourable Rick Barker, just asked a question, how good are you on drugs? As though, that was a qualification to speak on this. Well, I can confess that I'm addicted to caffeine. I've used nicotine, and I'm an irregular user of alcohol, but none of the other substances that we're trying to reduce harm from today. But it is, I think, pertinent to remind ourselves that we are all in some way dependent upon drugs. Most of us hopefully use them sensibly. But we are trying to, through the passage of this bill, and Labor supports the bill, reduce harm from drug abuse. And we've heard lots of wonderful words and rhetoric in the House about what we're trying to achieve here. And I did speak earlier on in this debate, in the committee stages, trying to bring things into balance, because there's the immediate assumption that in trying to reduce harm from drugs, we're trying to protect young people from themselves, Mr Speaker. And that's a very noble gesture for this House. The reality is that young people are smarter, know more, and probably see the future in a different light than most of us here. And so our attempts, and there have been many over the years, to try and regulate drugs have been futile for the most part. That is not to say that Parliament should not make a judgment, set a line in the sand and attempt to try and reduce harm, but do it in a way that is effective, not just satisfies our conscience or appeases the relatively uninformed public who make quick judgments on things like P, which is a horrific drug, which has terrible side effects and direct effects on both the users and families, right, and the community. But we're not quite sure when it comes to synthetic cannabinoids, and we're not quite sure what the manufacturers might come up with next. So the bill is an attempt to try and stay ahead of the innovation, the evolution, and the creativity of drug manufacturers, Mr Speaker. And many of them try to connect with youth because they see an obvious market there. For the most part, they are just commercial entrepreneurs who see an opportunity, who get out and sell their wares, often with little or no regard for the effects of this. And we've seen through what we call party pills, we changed legislation, we saw harm, we had to change the law of the land to try and stay ahead of that. And again, we are trying now to regulate I guess, the precursors to other drugs. And more recently, of course, I won't use the brand name, but synthetic cannabinoid that has come out into the market. And we hear is causing adverse effect on many young people who use it. The point I have to make again is that we have, before the government, a Royal Commission report on alcohol which has been sitting around for too long. The government doesn't want to tackle it because it's an election year, Mr. Speaker, and so they've parked it. So the harms that we know occur every day, every week, every year, in terms of road deaths, road injuries, child abuse, domestic violence, cirrhosis, you name it. There are many, many clearly researched, identified and well-known downsides to the abuse of alcohol. Not the sensible use, but the abuse. And there are people, of course, who become dependent. And in my view, we have been totally unprepared, under-resourced and uncommitted to address the problems of treatment for those people who need it. And Mr. Speaker, and coming back to the Drugs Amendment Bill, I have to say that the misuse of the Drugs Amendment Bill, which this is, and while it's dealing with some substances, I say that dependency, whether it be habitual or it be physiological or addictive, either way, people's lives are affected, and we have to put in place, and in my view, the industries themselves, particularly in alcohol and tobacco, those industries should be levied and should be paying for the treatment programs that we need up and down this country. We haven't gone so far as to do that. The Royal Commission, I think, has been a little vague in that area, but it has made a lot of recommendations, and this government has sat on its hands and refused to do anything about it. And so, in supporting the passage of this piece of legislation, let's not get overexcited. Let's not praise the government for its wonderful stance in reducing harm from drugs when it's dealing with, in relative terms, a small issue, quite an acute one for many people, but a small issue compared to the underlying issues of alcohol and tobacco. I'll acknowledge, I don't like doing this, Mr. Speaker, but I'll acknowledge the government's efforts in around tobacco. In fact, they hiked the price. They are looking, they say, at display, at point of sale. I applaud that. We need to make progress on that because we know, again, the harms from tobacco. We know the harms from alcohol, and they're doing nothing. We know the harms from from other Class B2 controlled drugs, Class A drugs, and we are attempting with the passage of this legislation, of course, to stay ahead of that. I think the provisions that the Minister's come up with that don't ban outright, but lead to control, and then, of course, prosecution for manufacture or supply of something that we know to be harmful is a good way forward. It's no good passing bills in this House that do not have widespread support and cannot have sensible implementation, Mr. Speaker. We simply run into a problem of implementation, creating a whole lot of illegal activity and giving another huge challenge for police. We ultimately need better education. We need to say to consumers, potential consumers, that the product that they might be considering consuming, be it smoking or drinking or sniffing or whatever, they need to know exactly what they are taking on board their body and what the potential harms might be from that. So better education, better identification of all the ingredients is really important, and I think this bill goes down that path. The Minister will have discretion to intervene. That's always a dangerous thing when you have a national government in place, Mr. Speaker. I'm not quite sure what drives their decision-making at times, but giving discretion to a Minister, it does give flexibility, but it also depends upon the wisdom of the minister and the advice given to him or her. So again, the passage of the legislation is our best attempt at this point to move forward on this issue, but let's not get too excited and think that we have reduced harm from drugs in this country when the big elephant in the room has yet to be addressed. And I say that there are hundreds of thousands of people out around the country now who are disappointed that alcohol has not been moved on prior to now, Mr. Speaker. So it is with I guess some enthusiasm I support this bill, but again, make a note in this House that I don't feel that this is a significant step forward. It is a step sideways. It is a new attempt to try and address a problem, but I know that we'll be back in the House in a short time, I'm sure, trying to address some other smart thing that has been created out in the marketplace. And if you have a government that is committed ideologically to the market providing the signals and the answers, then we're going to be in trouble. So, Mr. Speaker, I support the passage of this legislation and note that we need to see a bit more in the House.
Cool. Chris Hockenbold.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.